Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. One of the main topics of conversation in recent months has been around energy costs and the wider cost of living issues we face. War in Eastern Europe, Russian sanctions and global supply issues have all contributed to a state of play where energy is no longer cheap and plentiful in the UK, with bills at record levels this winter. Is this the future? Or with renewables and other forms of energy growing rapidly, can we expect a future of cheap energy independence? Joining us tonight to talk through all things energy are Sarah Merrick, Chief Executive of new clean energy ownership platform Ripple Energy. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
And George Hall, a long-time renewable energy expert, currently development manager for innovative energy producer Conrad Energy. Hello, George.
Good evening, Matt. How are you?
Yeah, so thank you both for joining us this evening. Energy, of course, is a big issue at the moment. We've been told recently that high energy prices are here to stay. You both work in sort of the new and innovative parts of the energy sector. Can you tell us a little bit more about your companies?
What Ripple does is, wind and solar are the UK's cheapest sources of electricity. And what we enable individual households and businesses to do is to collectively own large-scale wind farms, large-scale solar parks, and then get the green, low-cost, stable price electricity that they generate supplied to their home or business via the grid. So I own a tiny bit of our first wind farm, Greg Rather, which is in South Wales. So I get my bit of the generation supplied to my home each month, and I get savings applied to my bill automatically as a result. So you can just kind of own little bits of lots of different big wind farms and you get cheaper electricity, because with energy, scale is so important, and it's so much cheaper to own a little bit of a big wind farm or a big solar park rather than owning a little bit of solar on your roof. So so we enable everyone to own their own source of clean, low-cost electricity.
Conrad Energy, we call ourselves a vertically integrated independent power producer, so an IPP. So we own, operate, develop, build and keep generational and trading energy assets. So we're built up around flexible generation, so small independent gas peaking plants that kind of fill the holes around the energy market. So when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and these small gas localized energy plants come online and pick up the demand. But over the last 18 months, 2 years, we've diversified out into the battery world and solar world. So we have a supply license, we've got a trading desk, and so we buy, own, operate and trade energy.
Thank you so much for setting the scene for us. But would you be able to explain a little bit about why the UK is in the energy position that it's in, and why we currently have the highest energy prices in Europe?
Electricity prices are high, partly because it was kicked off in 2021 with supply chain constraints and the growth of a sort of post-COVID recovery in Asia. That started to push gas prices up, and then obviously Russia's invasion of Ukraine then made them spike even higher in spring 2022. In the UK, electricity prices are very heavily dominated by the gas price. So even though we get loads of our electricity from renewables, the price of that power is mostly traded at the gas price, because the gas is the marginal plant that's needed to meet that last little bit of demand on the system. So even though renewables are really cheap, prices across the board are really high because gas prices are really high. So we've seen prices start to come down over the last few weeks, but they're still kind of 3 times the level that they were in kind of normal time. So so consumers are paying a lot of money for their electricity, as well as a lot of money for their gas, because the gas and the electricity market in the UK, and also in large parts of Europe as well, are kind of inextricably linked, given the structures of the markets as they stand at the moment.
If our market share went primarily to renewable sources of energy, that energy price would be linked to that instead, and theoretically we'd have much cheaper electricity.
Not as the way the market is currently structured, because at the moment it's that last little bit of electricity that's needed to satisfy demand. So even if you had if you had loads of renewables in lots of time periods, you would still have gas being the sort of price setter. So there's work going on at the moment to try and sort of decouple those the two markets. Obviously, what Ripple does is our members, so the people that own the wind farms, they get their electricity from the wind farm at its operating cost, which is really, really low and doesn't go up when the gas price goes up. So high prices they get a high bill, but also they get a massive saving applied to that bill. So it means that they get stable prices for the wind farm's 25-year lifetime, but that's only for Ripple members. If you don't own your own source of clean power, then yeah, you're paying really high prices like everyone else.
I have to say I agree with what Sarah's saying. The price of energy is definitely peaked, and I think it's definitely on the fall. If you look at the energy mix at the moment, as we're live on at the moment, you're kind of 40% of our energy market is gas as we sit here now. There's 30% wind power on our electrical market and 10% nuclear. So we've definitely seen it fall back off, which is great news to consumers. And I think especially the forward prices into this summer and next winter are looking much more encouraging. And we've seen the government in the last couple of days announce that the help for businesses is not going to materialise. And a lot of that is because there perhaps isn't the need, because the longevity of the prices increases is perhaps not going to materialise. But we are part of a global market. So as Sarah says, factors out in the Far East have affected us. The fact that the French nuclear fleets of nuclear reactors have gone down recently, but they've managed to come back online now. So that's what we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing imports across the interconnectors coming into the UK. So that's all helping with those prices starting to fall. And what we're seeing now is what we think is going to be more of a long-term marketplace where prices tend to fluctuate either through the day or through the seasons. So we've seen, prices a couple of days ago were actually negative on the wholesale market. Recently, they've been up to sort of £200 a megawatt hour. So it's all part of that having that right mix of technologies to deliver the power at the right time.
Much has been made of the need for Britain's energy independence in the last year or so. Obviously, that is because of the danger in the way we currently import our energy and the supply side of our energy market. But what else about making energy here would mean it's cheaper for the British consumer to consume energy produced in the UK, if it's renewable, for example?
So I think you have, if we can work to sort of decouple the gas and the electricity market, which isn't easy, but they can.
How would you go about that process, Sarah?
So there are different ways that are being looked at the moment. So one would be more kind of long-term contracts. So lots of like offshore wind farms in particular are covered by these things called contracts for difference, and that kind of stabilizes costs because they agree to sort of pay a certain level. If the price is below that, they get the difference. If it's above, they have to pay money back to the government, essentially. So overall, that kind of stabilizes prices. That's sort of one option. And then other options are, kind of having just different structures for the price, and that could then feed through to, get more of wind and solar's low price feeding through to consumers. But in general, the more renewables you have on the market, the more, as sort of George said, the more lower price periods you get in the market. Obviously, on average, that then brings prices down. So in times where things are very constrained, prices go up because we're reliant on gas a lot. When there's much more availability of wind and solar in a half-hour period, that pushes the price down as well. So it's not as if the current market does work quite well, but when you've got a lot of gas, it does mean that you've got high gas prices when the gas price is high as well. But in general, if you've got a market that is very, very dominated by renewables and homegrown renewables, that also makes the whole economy more resilient because it's not susceptible to fossil fuel price spikes like we've seen at the moment. So as well as it being great to go net zero for an emissions perspective, from an economic perspective, it also protects the economy from fossil fuel price spikes like we've seen over the last couple of years, like we saw in the 70s as well. So there are loads and loads of reasons to want to have homegrown, low-cost electricity, most of which would come from renewables.
George, does that make electricity and energy cheaper for the consumer or just for the supplier?
It's going to make it cheaper for both, to be honest, because we are in a competitive marketplace. Those prices will feed their way through to the consumer. I completely agree with what Sarah says. The UK has some great attributes. We have the most successful wind farm in the world of the islands of Shetland at the moment, and we surprisingly have a reasonable amount of solar. So we are very much set to be able to take advantage of those natural environmental factors to take ourselves as off-grid as possible. And we're seeing that with the government's, the Scottish projects recently. There's up to another 50 gigawatts of wind offshore wind being announced in the last 12 months. One of those is Celtic wind off the sort of south, but in the Bristol Channel, which is very exciting. So offshore wind, even onshore wind, we're hearing a lot of noise from the government that they might be changing the planning rules. And ground mount solar can produce electricity at very cheap rates, very predictably, and will enable our national grid to be very carbon neutral in the long run, linked with a significant amount of storage.
Subject to my broadband, I'm going to come in with a few questions now. Both you've both talked us through the renewable side of things. That really is going to be the future, isn't it? A much larger, sustainable, renewable industry which is focused on wind. We've got floating wind farms developing in Wales. We've got, George, you mentioned the Bristol Channel. I think there's Awel and more. There's more things going on in Scotland, but also solar, also, tidal coming in. We really are going to see renewables boom for the rest of this century, really, do you think?
Exactly. So, at the moment, we've got, with wind and solar, it's around kind of 30% of the UK's power. By 2030, which was only like 7 years away, we're going to be getting up to 60+% wind. So that's, more than doubling the amount of wind on the grid, plus loads of solar. And so by then it will be very much a renewables led market, with gas picking up the gaps in between. But we'll also need, as obviously, when it's going to be night and it's going to be day. You don't necessarily know when the wind's going to be blowing. So you're going to need to have, alongside all that, as George was saying, loads more storage, but also loads more flexible consumption, so that consumers can start to shift their consumption to periods when there is more electricity available, and moving away from periods where the system might be a little bit tighter and we need to reduce consumption to match as well. But yeah, the UK is moving really, really quickly towards a renewables dominated electricity market, which is exactly what we need to be doing.
Well, George, you work in the storage sector as well. You're working on some really innovative battery schemes. Can you talk us through a little bit about how storage can work into this kind of whole area and help the energy sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's predicted that we're going to need around 15 gigawatts of storage capacity in the UK, and we're presently at about 1 gigawatt in the UK, and we're building a similar amount this year. So we're really early stages in terms of this marketplace at the moment. So batteries tend to do two things. First things first is they provide frequency response. So without getting too technical into the electrical, our grid should be at 50 hertz, and National Grid is contracted to supply it between 49.7 and 50.3 hertz. So batteries are brilliant at picking up those changes and those very, very quick changes in the frequency. So there's a number of products out there that our batteries work in dynamic containment for National Grid. And so in the short term, they'll be very much concentrated around providing services for National Grid. But in the longer term, the only way we can really store energy in this country at the moment is pumping water uphill in North Wales and releasing it at the appropriate time. So batteries will enable to be filled. We'll import the energy from the grid or from a renewable source into the battery at either the middle of the night or middle of the day when the sun's shining at a cheaper rate. It'll then be sold back to the grid during peak times, which tends to be about this time of night when everybody comes home, plugs the car in, starts cooking supper, or first thing in the morning when everybody's having a shower and having breakfast. So we have these sort of peaks and troughs within our demand. So the batteries will enable us to shift the energy around in a time frame, because unlike gas, it's difficult to store electricity. It's got to be used when it's produced. So batteries at the moment is one of the only ways we can do that. And so the challenges we face is to be able to do this in an economically viable place, to connect it to the grid in a timely manner, but also to be able to store enough of it to enable us to produce enough energy to get us through these peaks and troughs.
Wales historically has very poor grid infrastructure. What kind of work do you think needs to be done in order to ensure that our renewables boom really thrives? Because it's all well and good generating all this amazing renewable energy, but there's limits to it, no matter how good the battery storage technology is, until you actually can export that energy back into the grid and then back into houses.
You're absolutely right, Matt. National Grid have got some infrastructure issues, especially in South Wales. There's some upgrade projects ongoing at the moment, but we're not likely to see those coming online until at least 2028, 2030. So that's really going to inhibit the growth of renewables in South Wales until those sorts of dates. So any application made to the grid at the moment will come back with a date that is 2030 plus at the moment. And North Wales is probably worse. We're seeing connection dates in North Wales of 2034, 2035 to be able to connect grid scale projects, whether that's solar, whether that's battery, whether that's wind. So there needs to be a massive investment within the grid infrastructure, both in terms of capital outlay, but also planning to be able to allow us to decarbonise our network. And that is the biggest thing that's holding back our industry at the moment.
If I can add, none of this is new. It's been known for years and years that, Scotland's got fantastic wind resource, and we're going to need grid to get all this renewables down to the centres of consumption in southern England. Likewise, Wales has got fantastic resource. We're going to need grid to get all of that into, nearer to sources of consumption. So this has been known for years and years, and there's been so much opportunity wasted in terms of getting the grid built where it needs to be built. And it is crazy that we're seeing such long connection dates, because ultimately there's no point. There's no point in building a wind farm or a bit of storage or solar if you can't get it connected to the grid. So this is really constraining deployment of storage and new renewables now, because you can't get connected to the grid, so you just can't build the project, which means the UK isn't getting as much green low-cost power as it could do if there was grid there ready to take it.
Just on the basis of what you said about centres of consumption there, I know for a fact that lots of people in Wales and Scotland are very concerned that their natural resources are being sort of extracted out of those countries without necessarily the energy or the benefits going back to either Wales or Scotland. What do you say to those local people who are concerned that their countries are being used to generate this energy for the benefit of people in England?
So, what Ripple wants to do, and what we are doing, is enabling individual households and businesses to be able to own these wind farms and solar parks that are getting built. So what we can do is enable people who live local to the project to get kind of first dibs on becoming an owner of it. So they might get 2 weeks ahead of everyone else. So they can own the wind farm that they drive by on the way to work, or the solar farm down the road from them, and they get cheaper electricity as a result, and they get first priority on doing that. But I think separate to Ripple, it is in a renewables world, you can't relocate resources. Like the wind is, there are so much better wind resources in Scotland. There's great wind resources in Wales as well. England is less windy. England is more sunny. So you're getting, more solar projects in England. But the reality of living in a society is you have to put the wind farms and the solar parks where they are going to be best. And that's why we have a national grid to connect everything. But yeah, there is a lot of work going on to enable and ensure that people living near these projects can get more of the benefits directly. And and whether or not that's kind of there's sort of local there's construction jobs, there's operation and maintenance jobs as well. There are significant benefits that the local economy can derive from having these projects, as well as Ripple wants to absolutely really supercharge that by enabling local communities to be able to own it ahead of everyone else in the country as well. So it is an issue, but there are there's lots of work going on at the moment to try and ensure that local communities can get kind of first priority on the fantastic opportunities that you get from owning these resources as well.
George, did you have anything to add on that point?
No, the only quick thing I would say is that electricity always follows the path of least resistance. So if you've got assets close by, then you're going to be benefiting from those assets. So don't quite follow the argument that these are going to be generated in the extremities and used in the cities in England. It's going to be used locally. It's the same reason why you put solar panels on your roof, because you're going to save yourself electricity in the house. So,
as well as the national grid, there's a lot of talk around local grids. And last week, I think it was a policy which was announced in England was to have all new homes to have solar on from 2025. George, you're in the solar industry. That's got to be a good policy, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's been a policy we've been crying out for 10, 12 years. And, all new builds, whether it's commercial, industrial or domestic houses, should have solar on the roofs. It's an absolute no-brainer. Always has been. Completely agree. End of, full stop. Get on with it.
It certainly seems that it's coming that way in England. And but one of the things, housing domestic housing stock is one of the biggest issues around energy. And, certainly one of the things in Wales we're still doing is putting gas boilers in to new homes. So we're embedding that kind of gas infrastructure for at least another 10, 20 years. Sarah, have you got any thoughts on, how we can address that?
I mean, it was going to be addressed like 8-10 years ago. We were going to have zero carbon homes, so every new house was going to be zero carbon as standard, but that was scrapped before it was even introduced. So that there's just been 8-10 years of inaction on domestic low carbon performance, and as a result, all those people that are buying these new houses over the last 15 months have been paying way more in electricity bills than they would have done had they have, had a heat pump or had solar on their, or if they'd had solar on their roof. So, the argument that, this is just reducing the cost of new house building is so short-termist. And there's been tens of thousands of people buying these houses that haven't been protected from rising prices, and they've been really hit over the last 15 years. Which so yeah, of course you should just have solar on new homes as standard. It is such a no-brainer, and it should have been happening, as George said, for the last 8-10 years.
And George, I know you've worked on some really big kind of outside the domestic, where high energy use companies are investing in solar farms on site. So the one I've always been impressed with is the Bentley Motors 3 megawatt scheme, which you project managed. But what do you think of what France have announced recently around all car parks over, I think it's 60 car parks spaces to be covered in solar? Do you think we should be going down that route?
Absolutely, it's a brilliant idea. I mean, if you're looking at the wider picture, it's the decarbonisation of what we're doing at the moment, whether that's decarbonisation of heat, or whether that's decarbonisation of electricity. But one of the biggest challenges we face is the decarbonisation of transport. And so we are going to see, and we're seeing it at the moment, the vast number of EVs being brought onto the market at the moment. The Tesla 3 is the most popular car being sold in the UK at the moment. So where are these cars going to be charged? How are we going to cope with this massive amount of extra consumption on the network? And the solution, I think, is quite simple. You've got to be charging these cars either at home or at work. And the companies and the big sites where people work have the infrastructure to be able to cope with the electrical off-takers. So as we proved at Bentley, putting solar on top of a car park is financially viable. It's easy to do. It uses land that is not overly well utilised. It's easily serviced, maintained, and provides a direct relationship between generation being produced on the roof and put straight into either the electric cars or into the factory producing the cars. A very, very successful project.
I think those kind of laws, they make it just very clear what people have to do, and they reduce the risk of shall we do this, shall we not do this, and the uncertainty. It's like, if you're building a new car park, and of course you then put solar on top of it, it puts everyone on the same level playing field. All car park manufacturers know that's what they have to do. That's the deal. And it kind of actually reduces uncertainty in the market, and it just makes it easy for those investments to happen. If it's like, shall we, shan't we? What's the risk of doing that? It complicates things. And, provided that it's not a stupid thing that people are being required to do, then just making it like the standard and the thing that you have to do actually can reduce investor uncertainty and make it more easy for these things to happen.
Yeah, I think that's some of the terminology which is missing in our industry. It's about that certainty, which a lot of those who want to invest or are responsible for things just don't have. So one of the other renewable areas which is very pertinent to Wales is around tidal power. We've got a very high profile scheme in Swansea Bay, which was happening, then it's not happening. Now it's currently happening again, in line with a battery park. Have either of you got any kind of thoughts on where we are with that? I think tidal will eventually happen, but how do you think that will come about?
I've worked in the industry since 2000, and tidal has always been one of these technologies that is kind of about to come through, and wave technology as well. But I think there's a number of different issues that it faces. So with tidal in particular, the UK has got fantastic tidal resource, but actually if you look at the world's resource of tidal, a big chunk of it is in the UK, which means that when you're looking at, manufacturing tidal generators, it's not necessarily the case. If you crack the UK, you've got this huge global market to go for, whereas with wind and with solar, there's huge global resource to aim for if you develop like the winning technology, whereas you haven't got that with tidal. But also I think in terms of getting costs down, it's really hard for technologies to get their costs down until it's standardized. So at the moment you can't really draw what a wave generator looks like or what a tidal generator looks like. There's lots of different kind of competing technologies, and until you sort of settle on, right, this is what a wave generator looks like, or this is what a tidal generator looks like, you're not going to get the kind of learning by doing, by making the same widget for that generator over and over and over again. Whereas, with a wind turbine, what a wind turbine looks like. It's got 3 blades, and you can, build better towers, you can build better generators, but it's kind of working on the same thing, whereas you haven't got that volume with wave and tidal. I mean, that said, wave and tidal can do great things, but it's going to be a lot harder for costs to come down. The cost of solar has just plummeted over the last 20-30 years. Same with the cost of wind, like offshore wind, over the last 10-15 years, because you've had manufacturers manufacturing very similar things over and over again. Factories can just do slight evolutions of technology to just eke out better and better efficiencies, whereas you haven't got that standardization, and it's really hard for costs to come down without that standardization. So yeah, the Swansea Lagoon, it could deliver loads of power, but that power is likely to be expensive because it is kind of all bespoke projects. It's not just like, right, we're going to get one of those tidal generators off the shelf. You can't do that. It's all bespoke technology, which makes it very tends to make it very expensive. That's not necessarily to say that you shouldn't do it, but it just means that the cost of doing it is a lot more than would be for technologies that are a lot more mature, and they have got that kind of standardized, and they're right the way down their learning curve.
I tend to agree, actually, Kerry. Solar's been around for 40 years, wind's been around for a similar amount. We've known about tidal and wave energy for the similar sort of time frames. 2 of those industries have developed massively in that time frame, and one has pretty much stood still, and I think that will probably see its way out. I think there might be 1 or 2 odd outlier projects, but as a mainstream renewable technology, I wouldn't be investing in it. Sorry.
Well, one energy source that is even older than that is nuclear. Wales seems set to potentially have a new nuclear power station on Ynys Môn, as well as the potential for small modular reactors in places like Trawsfynydd. Do you see nuclear as part of our future energy mix?
Although I'm not personally a big fan of it, I think it will have to be part of the mix. I think these small Rolls-Royce reactors, I think, will become part of that mix to provide that base load, so that when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, these nuclear reactors will be there filling the voids. I suspect that government will look to promote them, whether they are funded using the same model as Hinkley Point or whether they're further private investment. We'll have to wait and see. But I would think in the next 4 or 5 years, these small nuclear reactors will start coming to fruition far more. The development of them will gather pace, and I think this spike in the energy price over the last 18 months will push their development forward.
Sarah, you mentioned the strike price of tidal being high, but that's nothing compared to the cost of building a nuclear power plant. Why do you think we're so accepting of the costs of nuclear but not of the costs of other, maybe not so well proven energy sources?
I mean, I think nuclear is a proven source of power, and Hinkley is incredibly expensive, but it's once it's operating, it's going to be generating a hell of a lot of power as well. So and again, there's nuclear power stations operating across the world. So yeah, I think nuclear will be part of our long-term energy mix. It has been for the last 30-40 years, and it just it sits there and does its thing. And yeah, I mean, I think there will be an issue around getting small modular reactors planning consented, because if it's hard to get a wind farm outside of town consented, it's going to be really, really hard to get a nuclear reactor outside of town consented. But that aside, I think there is going to be space in the market, and I think it's important to stress that we're going to need so much zero carbon power. It's not like, there's no magic bullet like, oh yeah, wind's going to do it all or solar's going to do it all. We need a mix. And yeah, I think it's entirely realistic for nuclear to be part of that mix, really.
Is nuclear good value for money? At these, the cost of building a plant is very, very large, but does it still present good value for money?
Well, I mean, I think in today's money, the Hinkley CFD is around £113 a megawatt hour, which, obviously compared to wholesale prices over the last year, that's quite a good deal. Compared to the CFD prices for offshore wind, it's more than double what the most recent offshore prices were. So kind of got to put it in the mix. They are very, very expensive. There's no getting away from that. But, you would hope, I know this was the plan when Hinkley was built, that, later ones will get cheaper. The idea with the small modular reactors is that you can do that standardization. So you're building the same widget over and over again. It's not a kind of bespoke project per, reactor, which basically most of our nuclear reactors were bespoke designs, whereas the whole point in modular is that you can just build the same thing over and over again, and that can bring the price down. But yeah, I would imagine consenting will be a massive problem in terms of how that technology can be deployed.
So in their evidence to the Welsh First Select Committee, I think over a year ago now, Westinghouse said that they, in order to make this sort of more cost effective, they'd like to see the sort of fleet effect of their nuclear power plant designs. You end up seeing numerous power plants of essentially the same design across the country. How likely do you think that would be, and how long would that take to get this sort of base load of zero carbon energy through nuclear?
I don't think zero carbon is going to be fully nuclear. It's all part of a mix and a mix of technologies, and nuclear's got its part to play within that, both the larger reactors like Sizewell and Hinkley, but also these smaller ones. And we know the time on these things is just takes such a long time. I mean, we know how long it takes to get a wind farm consented and built and connected to the grid. We're talking 6 to 8 years for those types of assets. So even a modular reactor with technology that's not yet proven or not yet produced is a long way into the future, and you're probably talking mid-2030s. But I think the desire there from both the Welsh Government and from the UK Government is to pursue these, and I think this is start of a sort of trickle-down effect to get people thinking about nuclear and a way forward and security of supply. And we're talking to landowners, we're talking to businesses on a daily basis. Price was always the most important thing, then became carbon, and now actually security of supply is the most important thing to businesses and commercial leaders out there. Without electricity, we can't do anything. So going back to your previous point, it's a cost-benefit analysis. It is expensive, but without it, the lights might start going out, and we can't afford that. So in that front, it probably is decent value.
We're exploring a lot of the various energy technologies, George, Sarah, and there's two really which are often cited as the future of energy. One is perhaps, something which people are looking at now around hydrogen and how we can use that, and whether that'll be used as a transport fuel or replace gas in our boilers. And then a little bit further down the line, we're always told about fission energy. What do you see about those two kind of future energy mixes? Likely pipe dreams, or something which, it's worth doing the work on to see what does develop?
In terms of hydrogen, I think, in the last 5 years, hydrogen has gone from like a footnote to being like this, it's just got so much attention. It will have its place, but the idea that you're going to have, domestic home heating run on hydrogen or even hydrogen cars is not the way to go, I would argue. I think you need to electrify things first. So, obviously switch to electric cars, obviously switch to electric heat pumps, and then power those with zero carbon electricity. I think hydrogen has probably got a place in terms of, things that can't be electrified. So like, maybe really heavy transport, some industrial processes, that kind of thing. But yeah, I really struggle to see a time where, people have got hydrogen boilers in their homes. It's the work that's needed to do that, the sort of critical mass you need to get a hydrogen grid is just too much, and each time when you make hydrogen, then when you use it again, you've got these conversion efficiencies. So by the time you're heating your home with hydrogen, you could have done it so much more efficiently, and using with less wind energy than if you'd had a heat pump. But that said, hydrogen is clearly going to be a part of our zero carbon future. But I think it needs to be put into perspective in terms of its role. And in terms of fission, you hear stories in the press about how it's they've made these amazing breakthroughs, and then
No, it is in the future. But I did note a story today of a plant being looked at for Oxfordshire. George, any thoughts on either of those technologies?
Hydrogen, yeah. Conrad's a massive supporter of hydrogen. So we have got, at the moment, we've got planning permission for 3 hydrogen plants. The first one is going to provide hydrogen into one of our flexible generation plants. So it will be a 20% mix. So just a blended mix into the gas plant. The second one will then be a replacement for a gas. So it'll be a peaking plant, but powered by hydrogen. And then our third project is going to be producing hydrogen for an off-taker for a commercial shipping organisation. So we really do see hydrogen as part of that mix of decarbonisation. We do see it very much being used for heavy industries, for transport, like Sarah says, not for cars, possibly for lorries, but definitely for larger applications, marine and maybe the rail network, hydrogen will work, and certainly in commercial and industrial uses. So Conrad are investing quite heavily in it. At the moment, it's certainly not a profitable place to be. And somebody described it to me like the solar industry in 2008. And I have to tend to agree with that. We are very much at embryonic stage of an industry, but you've got to be in it to learn a few lessons, to develop that knowledge. And we're really quite excited by hydrogen and see it as a big part of our energy mix going forward.
So just quickly to clarify, your hydrogen production for your schemes are from your renewable assets. That's how you create the hydrogen, is it? So
what we will do is the ones we've got at the moment will be we will be sleeving the energy from our renewable sources to the hydrogen sources. So it won't be, the hydrogen electrolyzers won't be on the same site as the renewable source. They will be located next door to the off-taker. In our political discourse on the pod, Wales being a net energy exporter features quite a lot. It's a lot of the things we talk around is the Welsh economy, how Wales and independent Wales could fund itself. But the reality is a lot of Welsh energy comes from imported Qatari gas, and a lot of our renewables is funded by Westminster feed-in tariffs. Have you got any thoughts on the Welsh energy mix going forward? What technologies might be there which we haven't perhaps looked at, or how they'd be funded?
So I was part of the Welsh Government's renewables deep dive, and a lot of that was looking at how can the benefits of deployment of renewables in Wales lead to sort of maximum benefit for the people of Wales. And as part of that, one thing that came out, as well as we need to upgrade the grid, and there was loads and loads of findings, but what one was about ownership, and by enabling new renewable projects that are going to get built in Wales to have an option for people in Wales to own them, so that the people in Wales get directly the cheap electricity that they produce was discussed as part of that. And the Welsh Government is very keen on requiring or encouraging new projects to have an element of local ownership. So I think, it's not necessarily the case that, you might have a project that is owned by a European utility, but, that project can still have partly, it can be owned in part by people in Wales and sort of beyond as well, so that they can get their bit of the wind farm's electricity at the low operating cost. So there are lots of different things, and there are lots of things being looked at as well. I think in terms of sort of new different technologies, that there's no sort of technologies out there that I think we haven't talked about already on here. There's no sort of miracle technology that's sort of hiding behind the sofa or anything. But yeah, it is. There's a lot of work going on to look at how we can get more of the benefits of Wales's energy deployment retained in Wales, and then that sort of goes from whether it's sort of industrial or industry located in Wales to, individual consumers as well.
And part of that, I suppose, Sarah, is the call and the suggestion of a state energy company will be set up in Wales, which will build an own energy provision in Wales, so trying to keep those benefits, which we touched on earlier, because a number of Welsh sites are owned by state-owned energy companies from overseas. Do you think that's a good approach, or do you think that might frighten off other private investment in the Welsh renewable sector?
I think that there's always a risk of those sorts of actions frightening in international investors. But I think in the Welsh context, the Welsh Government, and there are lots of there's state-owned forestry, so there's a lot of resources that the Welsh Government is kind of if not directly in control of, it's kind of linked to it. So, and again, going back to the point, that there's just so much that's needed. So I think if it was a risk that was going to crowd out other investment, that would be a concern. But I think there's just so much that needs to be done. It's not the case that the Welsh Government developer would crowd out other investment. I think there's just so much that needs to be done that it's a case of, all hands to the deck, doing as much as is possible, as quickly as possible. So, ultimately it's, it will be one part of the market, but I don't think, certainly from what I've seen so far, I don't think it will be like the majority of the market. They're talking about doing a few projects, but that, that's a few of many different projects that will be happening over the next, 5, 10, 15 years.
But if I was to offer the Welsh Government a bit of advice, Kerry, I think it would be to focus around the grid, because if you can unlock the grid, you'll then unlock the investment, the benefit, the decarbonisation that goes alongside it. So if the Welsh Government could work alongside National Grid to speed up the infrastructure improvements, the transformer upgrades, the overhead lines that need to be replaced, that's the quickest and the best way to get the benefits to local people. It'll enable businesses to put renewable generation behind the grid. It'll enable prices to fall and the security of supply, the sustainability increase. So that's got to be the place to win.
So George, thanks for that. You kind of summarised a good future point for Wales on the grid. Sarah, have you got anything? What would be your wish list to ask UK or Welsh Government to do to address energy going forward?
Yeah, I think top of the list would be massive rollout of domestic energy efficiency measures. So it's really boring, but it's really, really needed. And just using less electricity and less energy to heat your home saves people money. They could have saved so much more money had it been done 3 or 4 years ago, but that is absolutely not to say that we've missed the boat. We need to do it, and yeah, it's not very exciting, but it's really, really needed.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for both of you for coming on the pod this evening. If people want to hear more from you, where can they find you on Twitter? Sarah?
I'm at Speak Sarah Speak on the Twitter.
Wonderful. George?
I don't do social media.
Very wise indeed. But if you do want to follow Hiraeth on social media, you can go to @HiraethPod on Twitter and Facebook, or go to our website, www.walespolitics.com. Thank you again for coming on this evening, Sarah and George, and thank you to our listeners.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.